I stepped into the grand lobby of the Metropolitan Grand Ballroom, the air thick with the scent of fresh orchids and expensive perfumes. At 42, as the owner of Brooks Holdings, a real estate investment firm that quietly controlled multi-million-dollar properties across New York City, I had learned to navigate these spaces with calculated invisibility. Tonight, I wore a simple cream silk dress that hugged my curves without screaming for attention, paired with modest pearl earrings that once belonged to my grandmother. No flashy jewelry, no entourage, just me, blending in as an anonymous black woman at a high society gala for a charity I had anonymously funded with a 7-figure donation. I wanted to see how people treated someone like me when they didn't know my name carried weight. The ballroom was a spectacle of opulence, crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across marble floors, waitstaff gliding with trays of champagne flutes, and clusters of Manhattan's elite laughing in their designer gowns and tuxedos. I moved through the crowd with ease, nodding politely at a few familiar faces who didn't recognize me out of context. My goal was observation. How often had I been dismissed in rooms like this before my success became public knowledge? As I approached the champagne fountain, a towering cascade of bubbling gold, I felt a subtle shift in the air. A young woman in a glittering red gown, Brittany Ashford, I recognized her from society pages, the spoiled daughter of a Wall Street mogul, stepped directly into my path. "Excuse me, you're in my shot," she snapped, her voice laced with irritation as if I were a misplaced prop. She was mid-20s, blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her entourage of friends snapping photos for Instagram. Without waiting for a response, she shouldered past me deliberately, her elbow jabbing into my side hard enough to make me stagger. Pain flared in my ribs, but I caught myself, steadying against a nearby pillar. The champagne in her hand sloshed dangerously close to spilling. I straightened up, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the familiar burn of indignation. This wasn't new, it was the same casual disregard I'd faced growing up in Brooklyn, where my skin color often made me the help in strangers' eyes. Her friends giggled, one whispering loud enough for me to hear, "Who even let her in? That dress looks like it's from last season's clearance." Brittany turned back, her blue eyes narrowing as she sized me up from head to toe. The crowd around us began to notice, a few phones subtly lifting to capture the moment. I could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken assumptions hanging in the air like smoke. In that instant, I reminded myself why I was here, to expose the rot beneath the glamour. But as the pain in my side throbbed, I wondered if tonight's lesson would come at a higher cost than I anticipated. I didn't let the jab to my ribs show on my face. Instead, I adjusted my stance, feeling the cool marble beneath my heels as Brittany spun around, her red gown swirling like a cape. She fixed her gaze on me, her lips curling into a smirk that revealed perfectly whitened teeth. Her friends hovered nearby, phones already out, capturing every second for their social feeds. "God, you talk like you think you matter," she said, her voice carrying across the room, drawing more eyes our way. It wasn't just words, it was a declaration, meant to diminish me in front of everyone. She scanned me from my braided updo down to my sensible pumps, her expression twisting with disdain. "That dress is off the rack. I can tell. Are you staff or just someone's charity case?" The question hung in the air, laced with mockery. Her entourage erupted in snickers, one girl whispering, "Seriously, who wears that to a gala?" I felt the heat rising in my chest, a familiar rage bubbling up from years of similar encounters, in boardrooms, elevators, even grocery stores where my presence alone seemed to offend. But I held it in, my hands steady at my sides, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Then came her mother, Constance Ashford, gliding over in a cloud of Chanel perfume and diamonds that caught the chandelier light. She was in her 50s, with sharp features and an air of untouchable superiority. "Young woman," she said, her tone clipped and condescending, "the service entrance is in the back. If you're looking for the staff area, it's through the kitchen." She gestured dismissively toward a side door, as if I were a stray cat that had wandered in. The words stung, not because they were new, but because they echoed the systemic erasure I'd fought against my entire career, building Brooks Holdings from a single rental property in Brooklyn to a portfolio worth hundreds of millions, all while being overlooked or underestimated. The crowd swelled around us, forming a loose circle that trapped me in the center. Phones pointed like weapons, recording the spectacle. Laughter rippled through the group, subtle at first, then bolder. "Did she really think she could just walk in here?" someone muttered. Fingers pointed, head shook in feigned pity. I stood there, isolated under the glittering lights, the weight of their judgment pressing down like an invisible force. My mind raced. This was exactly why I'd come incognito, to witness the raw prejudice beneath the polished facade. Yet, in that moment, the humiliation burned deeper than I'd anticipated, a reminder that no amount of success could fully shield me from it. Still, I breathed steadily, my eyes locking onto Brittany's, silently promising that this wasn't the end. I kept my composure, even as Constance's words echoed in my ears, her dismissal hanging like a veil over the growing spectacle. The circle of onlookers tightened, their murmurs blending with the distant hum of the violin quartet. I could sense the shift, the way events like this fed on themselves, turning a minor encounter into a public trial. But I wasn't here to play the victim, I was here to observe, and now, to endure just long enough for the truth to surface. "I have an invitation," I said softly, my voice steady despite the knot tightening in my stomach. "I'm a registered guest." The statement was simple, factual, meant to de-escalate without escalating my own anger. But before anyone could respond, a tall figure pushed through the gathering, Richard Ashford, Brittany's father, his silver hair slicked back, exuding the confidence of old money. He was in his mid-50s, the kind of man who commanded rooms with a single glance, his tailored suit screaming boardroom dominance. "Security," he barked, his eyes barely grazing me as if I were beneath notice. "Escort this woman out. She's disrupting the event." Drake, the security guard, a burly man with a shaved head and a uniform that strained against his frame, stepped forward without hesitation. His hand clamped onto my arm, fingers digging in just enough to send a jolt through my elbow. "Ma'am, you need to come with me," he grunted, ignoring my attempt to pull back gently. "Please check the guest list," I insisted, my tone measured, refusing to let frustration crack my facade. The grip tightened, pulling me toward the side exit as if I were luggage to be removed. Brittany, emboldened by her father's intervention, stepped closer, her face flushed with triumph. With a theatrical flick of her wrist, she tilted her glass, sending a cascade of red wine splashing across my dress. "Oops," she cooed, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Maybe if you weren't blocking the champagne table like hired help, this wouldn't happen to people like you." The liquid soaked through the silk, warm and sticky, trickling down my back in rivulets that stained the fabric irreversibly. Under the chandelier's glow, each drop caught the light, shimmering like crimson tears on the pristine marble floor. The scent of Merlot mixed with the floral arrangements, turning my nostrils sour. Gasps rippled through the observers, but no one intervened. I stood there, unmoving, the wine pooling at my feet, my skin prickling with the chill of exposure. My pulse thrummed in my ears, a steady drumbeat of restraint. I didn't wipe it away, I didn't shout. Instead, I lifted my chin and met Brittany's gaze directly, my eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her smirk falter for a fraction of a second. In that silent exchange, I poured every ounce of my unspoken power, years of building an empire from nothing, of outmaneuvering men like her father. She blinked first, a tiny crack in her armor, but it was enough. The night was far from over. As Drake's fingers tightened around my arm, he propelled me toward the side exit with a shove that sent a fresh wave of discomfort through my soaked dress. The wine clung to my skin, cooling rapidly in the air-conditioned hall, but I focused on the path ahead, refusing to stumble. The onlookers didn't disperse, instead, they pressed closer, their faces a mix of curiosity and amusement. A middle-aged man in a velvet blazer chuckled under his breath, leaning to his companion, "Poor thing. Probably snuck in with catering." His words sliced through the murmurs, encouraging others to join in with knowing nods. Brittany, still basking in her victory, raised her phone higher, the screen glowing as she switched to livestream mode. Her voice projected with feigned sympathy, amplified for her followers. Some people really think crashing a gala is classy. Y'all, this is what entitlement looks like. Don't worry, she's being escorted out. She panned the camera slowly over me, capturing the wine stains and my composed expression, her followers' comments likely flooding in with emojis and agreements. No one stepped forward to question her. The elite crowd seemed content to watch the drama unfold, treating it like live entertainment. Constance hovered nearby, her diamond necklace catching the light as she folded her arms. These events are for donors, not for show-offs, she declared, her gaze sweeping over me with finality, as if sealing my fate. Her statement drew approving hums from a cluster of women in sequin dresses, one adding, "Exactly, standards must be maintained." The group swelled, phones multiplying like spotlights, recording from every angle. Flashes popped intermittently, turning the hallway into a makeshift runway of ridicule. Whispers escalated, "How embarrassing, she should know her place." The atmosphere thickened, charged with unspoken biases, making the space feel smaller, more oppressive. I absorbed it all, their laughter, the clicks of cameras, the absence of intervention, fueling a quiet resolve deep within. This wasn't just about me, it was a mirror to the prejudices I'd dismantled in my boardrooms, where I'd turned skepticism into partnerships. Drake's grip loosened slightly as we neared the door, perhaps sensing my unyielding posture, but the damage was done. The public display had amplified the insult, broadcasting it beyond these walls. Yet, amid the chaos, I caught a fleeting glance from a young event staffer in the background, his brow furrowed in hesitation. The tide might turn, but for now, I let them revel in their ignorance. I turned slightly against Drake's hold, my arm aching from his unrelenting grasp, but my focus sharpened on Richard Ashford. He stood there, arms crossed, his presence dominating the corridor like a king surveying his court. The murmurs from the crowd faded into a low hum as I met his eyes directly, unflinching. My voice came out even, laced with a quiet certainty that cut through the tension. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? You might regret how this night ends." The words hung between us, simple yet weighted with implication. I could see the flicker in his expression, a brief shadow of doubt crossing his polished facade before he masked it with a scoff. He stepped closer, his cologne sharp and overpowering, towering over me as if height alone could intimidate. "Is that supposed to scare me?" he retorted, his tone dripping with arrogance, a smirk playing on his lips. "You know who I am?" It was a challenge, thrown out like a gauntlet, reminding everyone of his influence, the Wall Street tycoon whose name opened doors and silenced critics. I held his gaze, my pulse steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Years of negotiating multi-million-dollar deals had taught me the power of restraint. I'd closed acquisitions on properties twice this size without raising my voice. "Yes," I replied calmly, my words deliberate and unhurried. "But you don't know who I am." There was no threat in my tone, just fact, a subtle warning wrapped in composure. The corridor seemed to hold its breath, a few guests exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier amusement waning as the exchange lingered. Richard's smirk faltered for a heartbeat, his brows knitting together in irritation. He waved a hand dismissively, signaling Drake to continue. "Get her out of here," he ordered, turning away as if I were already forgotten. But I caught the unease in his posture, the slight shift of his shoulders, the way he avoided meeting my eyes again. Brittany hovered behind him, her confidence cracking as she darted looks between us, her phone still in hand but no longer recording. The staff nearby shifted uncomfortably, one young waiter averting his gaze entirely. In that moment, I felt a surge of quiet empowerment. This wasn't about confrontation, it was about planting seeds of uncertainty. They assumed my silence meant weakness, but it was strategy, allowing their overreach to unravel them. As Drake tugged me forward again, I knew the revelation was brewing, just beyond their sight. The game had shifted, even if they didn't realize it yet. In that suspended moment, as Richard dismissed me with a wave, a young man in a crisp event coordinator vest edged through the periphery of the crowd. He was in his late 20s, with neat dreadlocks tied back and a clipboard clutched under his arm. Marcus, I later learned, one of the junior managers overseeing the gala's logistics. His eyes met mine briefly as he passed, and something shifted in his expression, a spark of recognition, followed by a double take that made him halt mid-stride. "Wait, is that," he murmured, barely audible over the lingering whispers, his brow furrowing as if piecing together a puzzle. Before he could approach, Constance intercepted him, her manicured hand shooting out to grasp his sleeve. "She's not on the guest list," she hissed, her voice low but authoritative, pulling him back like a leash. "Don't bother." Marcus hesitated, his gaze darting between her and me, confusion etching lines on his forehead. He nodded reluctantly, but I caught the subtle unease in his posture, the way he lingered a second too long, his fingers twitching toward his pocket. I allowed a faint smile to curve my lips, subtle enough to go unnoticed by most, as I rested my hand on the strap of my worn leather bag. My nails, painted in a soft mocha shade, tapped lightly against the buckle. Inside that unassuming satchel lay the documents that could upend this charade, the deed to the building, emails confirming my firm's ownership of the venue, and records of the multi-million-dollar renovations I'd personally overseen. No one suspected, to them, it was just another accessory on an intruder. But I knew its contents held the key to flipping this narrative. Quietly, just loud enough for a few nearby ears, including Marcus's, I murmured, I was invited. I just chose not to announce myself. The statement landed like a pebble in a still pond, sending ripples of doubt through the closest observers. A woman in pearls shifted uncomfortably, while a man adjusted his tie, suddenly averting his eyes. Marcus froze, his hand now fully slipping into his pocket to retrieve his phone. He glanced at the screen, thumb scrolling frantically, his face paling as he cross-referenced whatever database he accessed. I didn't react outwardly, but internally, satisfaction bloomed, a quiet thrill at the impending unraveling. Constance shot him a glare, but he was already absorbed, oblivious to her command. The corridor felt charged now, the air humming with unspoken questions. My bag's weight against my side felt like an anchor, grounding me as the first threads of their certainty began to fray. Brittany didn't let the moment fade. As Drake resumed his push toward the exit, she circled back with predatory grace, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Phone raised like a trophy, she snapped several more photos of me, my wine-drenched dress, my restrained arm, the guard's stern profile. "Let's make sure she doesn't sneak in again," she announced to her followers, her thumb flying across the screen. "Post that on socials." Her voice carried a gleeful edge, turning my humiliation into content for likes and shares. I could imagine the captions, uninvited drama at the gala or worse, laced with veiled slurs. Richard, still commanding the scene from his vantage point, gestured expansively to the security team lingering nearby. "Make sure she's permanently banned from the property," he declared, his words booming with finality. He addressed Drake directly, "Log her details. No re-entry, ever." The instruction landed like a decree, prompting nods from a few staff members who had materialized at the edges. Constance smiled approvingly, her posture straightening as if this resolved everything neatly. The crowd, emboldened by the family's authority, murmured in agreement, some even applauding lightly, treating the escalation as justified entertainment. I pivoted slightly, the motion pulling against Drake's hold, and locked eyes with Richard once more. A subtle smile tugged at my lips, not warm, but laced with irony. "You really want to ban me from my own building?" I asked, my tone conversational yet pointed, carrying just enough volume to reach the inner circle. The question sliced through the noise, freezing the air for a split second. Faces turned, eyebrows raised in confusion, a woman gasped softly, while a man in a bow tie tilted his head, puzzled. But the pause shattered quickly. Laughter erupted, first from Brittany, high and mocking, then rippling outward like a wave. "Oh my God, delusional much," she crowed, clutching her side as if it were the funniest joke of the evening. Her friends joined in, their chuckles sharp and derisive. "Her own building? That's rich," one quipped. Richard snorted, shaking his head in amusement, dismissing my words as the ramblings of someone cornered. "Keep dreaming," he muttered, turning to Constance with a shared eye roll. The group fed off the ridicule, their voices overlapping in a chorus of disbelief. "Who does she think she is? Pathetic bluff." Drake's grip intensified, urging me forward again, but I didn't resist overtly. Instead, I absorbed the mockery, letting it fuel my inner calm. Their certainty was cracking, even if they couldn't see it yet. Marcus's hurried scrolling in the background hinted at the storm brewing. The laughter echoed down the hall, but it felt hollow, a fragile shield against the truth inching closer. Marcus lingered at the edge of the throng, his clipboard forgotten as he fumbled for his phone. I caught the motion from the corner of my eye, his fingers trembling slightly as he unlocked the screen and tapped into an app, likely the event's internal database. His face, illuminated by the glow, tightened with concentration. Seconds ticked by, the laughter from Brittany's group still echoing faintly, but his expression shifted from curiosity to shock. He leaned toward his assistant, a young woman in a black pantsuit, whispering urgently, "Wait. Diana Brooks? That's the name on the ownership file the landlord sent us. The woman tonight is the property owner." The assistant's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth in disbelief. "You mean the woman they just threw out?" she hissed back, glancing toward me with a mix of horror and realization. Marcus nodded frantically, already pocketing his device and shouldering through the bodies blocking his path. "Stop. There's a mistake," he called out, his voice rising above the din, cutting through the residual chuckles like a siren. He pushed past a cluster of guests, nearly colliding with a waiter balancing a tray, his urgency drawing puzzled stares from those nearby. The shift was palpable now, the air growing thicker with uncertainty. A couple in elegant attire exchanged hushed words. "What if she's telling the truth?" the man murmured to his partner, his brow creased. She nodded slowly, her gaze flicking between Richard and me. Another guest, an older gentleman with a silver cane, tilted his head thoughtfully. "That comment about her own building, it didn't sound like a joke," he said to no one in particular, prompting a ripple of agreement from a nearby trio. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Ownership file? Who is she really? This could be bad for the Ashfords." The once unified front of mockery began to fracture, faces turning from amusement to apprehension. I remained rooted, Drake's hold on my arm slackening as he sensed the changing tide. The corridor buzzed with subdued conversations, the earlier confidence evaporating. Brittany paused her scrolling, her thumb hovering over the screen as she caught snippets of the doubt. Richard's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing toward Marcus's approaching figure. Constance fidgeted with her necklace, her composure cracking for the first time. I watched it all unfold, a quiet thrill coursing through me, the seeds of revelation sprouting amid their chaos. No one moved to intervene yet, but the energy had transformed, suspicion hung heavy, replacing the disdain. Marcus burst closer, waving his arms. "Hold on. We need to verify this now." His words amplified the tension, pulling more eyes toward us, the gala's facade crumbling under the weight of emerging truth. Just as Drake swung open the heavy double doors to the outside, the cool night breeze rushing in like an uninvited guest, I planted my feet firmly on the threshold. The motion halted his momentum, forcing him to release my arm with a grunt of surprise. I straightened my posture, the wine-soaked fabric clinging uncomfortably to my back, but I ignored it. My eyes fixed on Richard Ashford across the corridor, piercing through the haze of lingering mockery. The crowd's laughter had dwindled to uneasy chuckles, replaced by a charged silence as whispers of doubt circulated. I raised my chin, my voice clear and unwavering, carrying across the space like a deliberate echo. "I'll give you 5 minutes to decide how you want this night to be remembered." The sentence landed with precision, no anger, no plea, just an unyielding promise. Richard's face tightened, his confident demeanor cracking as he processed the implication. Brittany froze mid-gesture, her phone slipping slightly in her grip, her earlier triumph evaporating into confusion. "What does that even mean?" she muttered, but her tone lacked its previous bite, now tinged with uncertainty. Constance's hand fluttered to her throat, her diamonds glinting nervously under the lights. No one grasped the full weight immediately. A few guests exchanged sidelong glances, brows furrowed in bewilderment. One woman in a sapphire gown leaned to her companion, "That sounded serious." Another man adjusted his cufflinks, murmuring, "Maybe we should check who she is." The air thickened with hesitation, the group's unity fracturing as second thoughts crept in. Drake hovered awkwardly beside me, unsure whether to proceed, his radio crackling faintly in his pocket. But then, Marcus burst fully into view, his footsteps pounding against the floor as he waved frantically. "Ms. Brooks." "Wait," he shouted, his clipboard clattering to the ground in his haste. He shoved past a startled couple, his face flushed with urgency, drawing every eye toward him. "There's been a huge error." I didn't turn to acknowledge him, instead, I remained poised at the door, my expression neutral, as if I'd anticipated this exact interruption. Internally, a sense of vindication swelled, the pieces falling into place, their assumptions unraveling thread by thread. Richard's eyes darted to Marcus, then back to me, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. Brittany lowered her device entirely, her followers forgotten as reality intruded. The corridor pulsed with anticipation, the gala's glamour fading into a tableau of impending reckoning. I stood there, unmoved, letting the seconds tick by, knowing the revelation would hit like a thunderclap. 5 minutes, plenty of time for them to reflect, but not enough to escape the consequences. The night, once theirs to control, now teetered on the brink of transformation. Marcus burst through the hesitant crowd, his breaths coming in ragged gasps, his vest askew from the sprint. He skidded to a halt near the doorway, where I still stood poised, the night air whispering against my damp clothing. "That's Diana Brooks, she's the landlord," he exclaimed, his voice cracking through the stunned quiet, loud enough to echo off the high ceilings. Head snapped toward him, the earlier whispers halting abruptly. "The whole building belongs to her holding company." Behind him, the senior event manager, a stern woman in her 40s with a headset dangling from her ear, hurried forward, her tablet in hand. She nodded vigorously, her face drained of color as she consulted the screen. "I just checked with headquarters," she confirmed, her tone urgent and apologetic. "Her LLC owns this property, not the hotel chain, not the gala sponsors. We're tenants here." She thrust the device forward as if it were evidence in a trial, the digital records glowing accusingly. The grand hall seemed to implode in silence, a collective inhale that sucked the energy from the space. Faces that moments ago wore smirks now twisted in shock, eyes widened, darting between Marcus, the manager, and me. Richard's authoritative stance crumbled, his shoulders slumping as realization dawned. Brittany's device trembled in her grasp, her livestream forgotten mid-frame. Constance's hand dropped from her neck, her poise fracturing into visible panic. The circle of guests fragmented, some stepping back as if distance could absolve them of complicity. I felt the power dynamic invert like a tide turning, years of quiet acquisitions, of outbidding competitors in silent auctions, now manifesting in this pivotal reveal. A subtle curve touched my lips, not triumphant but satisfied, as I watched the dominoes fall. Whispers erupted anew, this time laced with alarm. "She owns the place? How did we not know?" A man in a tailored vest muttered to his date, "This is a PR nightmare." The senior manager approached me tentatively, her expression a mix of awe and regret. "Ms. Brooks, we had no idea." Drake released my arm entirely, stepping away with mumbled apologies, his earlier bravado evaporating. The cool draft from the open doors carried the faint scent of city rain, a refreshing contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I didn't move yet, savoring the shift, the way their world tilted on its axis. Marcus, still catching his breath, locked eyes with me, relief flooding his features. The revelation hung heavy, transforming the gala from a stage of exclusion to one of reckoning. The senior manager, her tablet trembling slightly in her grip, approached Richard with hurried steps, leaning in close to his ear. "Sir, we just confirmed," she whispered, her voice barely above a hush but carrying the gravity of a verdict. "Diana Brooks is not just the owner. She's the principal investor behind the entire renovation. We're leasing the space from her." She angled the screen toward him, displaying the corporate records, my company's logo emblazoned at the top, alongside the lease agreements and funding logs that detailed my multi-million-dollar contributions to transforming this once dilapidated venue into the opulent hall it was now. Richard's face drained of color, his jaw slackening as he absorbed the information. He pivoted sharply toward Brittany, who stood frozen, her device still clutched in her hand like a relic of her misplaced bravado. Sweat beaded on his forehead, glistening under the overhead lights, as he stammered something incoherent under his breath. Brittany's eyes darted wildly, her earlier poise shattering into fragments of panic. "What?" she breathed, the word escaping like a deflated sigh, her fingers fumbling to lower the phone, the live stream abruptly ending with a clumsy tap. I felt the revelation settle over the room like a heavy curtain falling, muffling the remnants of chatter. Guests who had laughed moments ago now stood rigid, their expressions morphing from entertainment to discomfort. A woman clutched her clutch tighter, while a man loosened his collar, as if the air had grown too thick. The power I'd wielded quietly for years, acquiring properties through strategic bids, revitalizing neighborhoods without fanfare, now stood exposed, a force they couldn't ignore. With deliberate slowness, I lifted the toe of my shoe from the threshold, the subtle click echoing in the hush. I took a measured step back into the corridor, then another, reclaiming the space they had tried to eject me from. No one dared obstruct my path. Drake backed away entirely, his hands raised in silent surrender. The manager nodded at me deferentially, her earlier oversight etched in her apologetic stance. "Ms. Brooks, please accept our deepest regrets," she said, but I waved it off gently, my focus elsewhere. Richard cleared his throat, attempting to salvage his dignity. "This is unexpected," he muttered, but his voice lacked its former command. Brittany shrank behind him, her red gown suddenly seeming too vibrant, too exposed. I didn't acknowledge them yet. Instead, I savored the inversion, their world, once so assured, now orbiting mine. Brittany's composure shattered first, her voice emerging in fragmented bursts. "Wait, you're saying, she owns all of this," she stammered, her fingers loosening around her phone until it clattered to the floor with a sharp crack. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the manager's tablet to my face, color draining from her cheeks. "I didn't know, I just thought," the words tumbled out, laced with desperation, her earlier mockery now a hollow echo in the vast hall. I cut her off mid-sentence, my tone level but edged with precision, carrying across the stunned assembly. "You didn't think," I said, each syllable deliberate. "You assumed." The accusation hung there, simple and unyielding, stripping away her defenses. She recoiled as if struck, her hands fluttering uselessly at her sides, the red gown that once amplified her presence now making her seem small and exposed. Whispers from the guests turned pointed. How could she? That was uncalled for. A woman nearby shook her head, murmuring to her companion, entitlement at its worst. Richard advanced then, his strides faltering as he neared, his once imposing frame shrinking under the weight of exposure. "Ms. Brooks," he began, his voice cracking with forced civility, "I sincerely apologize. This is a terrible misunderstanding." He extended a hand, palm up in a gesture of conciliation, but his eyes betrayed the panic, sweat slicking his brow, his tie suddenly askew as if he'd tugged at it unconsciously. I met his gaze without flinching, letting the silence stretch just long enough to amplify his discomfort. "You should have apologized before you had to," I replied, my words calm yet piercing, refusing to soften the blow. He withdrew his hand, deflating visibly, his shoulders sagging as the reality sank in. Constance edged forward, her expression a mask of feigned regret, but she said nothing, her earlier authority evaporated. The crowd's murmurs swelled into outright commentary, they went too far. Serves them right. Phones that had captured my supposed ejection now pivoted to them, the tables turning in a digital reversal. I watched their downfall unfold, the Ashfords, symbols of privilege, reduced to stammering figures amid the opulent setting they'd claimed as their domain. Brittany bent to retrieve her device, her movements jerky, tears welling as the judgment of the room pressed in. Richard muttered excuses to no one, his empire of influence cracking in this single, unforeseen moment. The air buzzed with schadenfreude, the gala's veneer peeling away to reveal the fragility beneath. I stood there, centered in the shift, feeling the balance restore itself. I didn't linger to bask in their unraveling. With a subtle adjustment to my sleeve, smoothing the fabric still damp from the wine, I pivoted away from the cluster of stunned faces. The corridor stretched before me like a reclaimed path, each step deliberate and unhurried. The Ashfords remained rooted in place, Richard's mouth agape, Brittany's hands clasped over her chest as if warding off a chill, Constance's eyes averted in defeat. No one uttered a word, the earlier cacophony of judgment had evaporated into a profound hush, broken only by the faint clink of distant glassware. As I traversed the marble expanse, heads turned in my wake, expressions a mosaic of awe and remorse. A few guests parted instinctively, creating a corridor of deference they hadn't offered before. Whispers had ceased entirely, no snide remarks, no concealed snickers. Instead, wide-eyed stares followed my progress, tracing the confident sway of my hips, the lift of my chin. It felt like striding across a stage I'd owned all along, the spotlight now illuminating their folly rather than my supposed intrusion. One woman, clutching a champagne flute, met my gaze briefly and nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the shift. The grand doors loomed ahead, no longer a barrier but an exit on my terms. Drake hovered at the periphery, his posture slumped, avoiding eye contact as if I'd become untouchable. Marcus stood nearby, clipboard reclaimed, his relief palpable in a tentative smile I didn't return. Outside, the New York evening enveloped me, the hum of traffic, the distant siren wail, a light mist settling on the pavement. My driver, a discreet professional in a black suit, awaited beside the sleek sedan, its tinted windows reflecting the city lights. No ostentatious markings, no need for fanfare, it was simply there, ready as always. I slid into the back seat, the leather cool against my skin, and exhaled slowly. The door closed with a soft thud, sealing away the chaos. As the car pulled away from the curb, I glanced back through the rear window, the ballroom's facade glowing warmly, a facade now cracked by truth. Satisfaction coursed through me, not vengeful but affirming. I'd entered as an observer, I left as the architect of change. The night air rushed past, carrying me forward, untouched by their remnants. A young server, barely out of his teens with a name tag reading Jamal, lingered near the grand entrance, his tray balanced precariously on one hand. He'd been the one who'd witnessed the entire ordeal from the sidelines, my initial arrival, the confrontation, the wine spill, and now the fallout. As my sedan pulled away, he turned to his colleague, a middle-aged bartender wiping a glass with a cloth, his voice low but carrying in the quiet aftermath. "You know what's wild?" Jamal said, setting down his tray with a soft clink. She didn't raise her voice once. And yet, she silenced an entire room. He shook his head, replaying the scene in his mind, the way the Ashfords had crumbled, the guests' faces shifting from scorn to stunned reverence. The bartender paused his polishing, leaning against the bar with a thoughtful nod. "Yeah, kid. Power like that doesn't need volume. It's in the knowing." Jamal pulled out his phone, glancing at the screen where he'd discreetly captured footage, not the whole thing, but enough to document the shift. "I recorded everything," he admitted, his thumb hovering over the delete button before deciding against it. Not to go viral, but to remind myself, never judge a guest by how quiet she walks in. The bartender chuckled softly, setting the glass aside. Smart move. Tonight's a lesson in assumptions. That woman? She's probably built more empires than half these folks combined. Their conversation drifted into the night, a quiet reflection amid the resuming hum of the gala inside. From my vantage in the car, receding into the city streets, I couldn't hear their exact words, but I'd caught snippets through the open door, their tones laced with newfound respect, a ripple effect of the evening's turn. It warmed me, not out of vanity, but validation. My approach, rooted in patience and proof, had planted seeds beyond the Ashfords' downfall. Jamal's resolve mirrored my own journey, from overlooked outsider to undeniable force. As the lights of Manhattan blurred past, I leaned back, the events crystallizing into a personal mantra. Change didn't demand spectacle, it thrived in subtlety, reshaping perceptions one revelation at a time. In the week that followed, whispers of the gala's upheaval spread through New York's social circles like whispers on a breeze. I didn't monitor the fallout obsessively. My days were filled with overseeing new acquisitions, from waterfront developments in Brooklyn to high-rises in Midtown, but fragments reached me through discreet channels. A contact at the venue mentioned a subtle addition near the entrance, a framed plaque, elegantly mounted on the polished wall beside the double doors. It bore a simple inscription in etched gold lettering: "Respect is not owed to power. It's owed to presence." The words weren't mine, perhaps Marcus or another staffer had coined them, inspired by the evening's revelations. Yet they captured the essence of what I'd demonstrated, not through confrontation, but through unyielding authenticity. I imagined guests pausing before it, their reflections caught in the glass, pondering the shift it represented. No grand announcement accompanied its installation. It simply appeared, a quiet sentinel reshaping the space I'd revitalized years ago with my investments. I never returned to the ballroom. There was no need. My absence spoke volumes, a deliberate choice to let the lesson resonate without my shadow. From afar, reports trickled in. The Ashfords had retreated from public events, their influence dimmed by viral clips and pointed editorials. Britney's accounts went private, her bravado silenced by backlash. Richard issued a terse statement about learning opportunities, but the damage lingered. More profoundly, the venue transformed. Staff training sessions emphasized inclusivity, drawing from that night's missteps. Now, every entrant, regardless of attire, ethnicity, or apparent status, received a new greeting: "Welcome. How may I address you properly?" It was a small pivot, yet revolutionary, forcing acknowledgement of individuality before assumptions took root. I pictured a young black professional stepping inside, met not with scrutiny but with equity, a ripple from my stand that extended beyond one evening. In quiet moments, driving through the city's veins, I reflected on that plaque. It wasn't a trophy, it was a testament. Power, I'd learned, wasn't in ownership alone, but in the quiet disruption of norms. The night had etched its mark, proving that presence, unapologetic and true, could redefine even the most gilded spaces.